left an indelible memory.
C'est peut-être l'image la plus impressionnante que je garderai de mon existence. C'est-à-dire que au petit matin, nous avons traversé Phnom Penh. La ville, la notion de ville n'existait plus.
Through the creation of semi-industrial peasant-producer cooperatives, thereby to put the entire urban population into a vast re-education situation in which they would be controlled A, by the poor peasantry, and B, by the party through that poor peasantry.
En second lieu, cette évacuation de Phnom Penh a aussi pour objectif de déjouer le plan de sabotage, d'assassinat, de complot.
In spite of young Stadi's reassurances, the reality of daily life in the countryside was radically different.
We found these children in the office building. All were paralyzed with hunger and...
And do you really believe that those 16,000, including women and children, were agents of a foreign government?
Pol Pot uses the code name Ya for Nay Saron, his friend since the 1960s. After 10 days locked up in Tuol Sleng, Nay Saron wrote a confession, but noted in it that he had been forced under torture to confess to imaginary crimes. On one page, Duc has crossed out a sentence and written in the margin in red ink, "You must not write this sort of..."
What is involved here is, in effect, to let the Red Chinese know in Vietnam, as we in effect let Khrushchev know in the confrontation in Cuba, that the United States will not stand by and allow any power, however great, take over another country by aggression. A retreat from the United States from Vietnam would be a communist victory, a victory of massive proportions, and would lead to World War III.
By early 1968, America had dropped almost 3 million tons of bombs on Vietnam. Twice the tonnage dropped on Germany and Japan in World War II. America was trying to stop North Vietnam from sending soldiers and supplies to the south, trying to force the communist leaders in Hanoi to give up their long-held goal of a unified Vietnam. After the impact of the 1968 Communist Tet Offensive, President Johnson ordered a bombing cutback, and peace talks began.
We all went and stayed in hotel rooms rather than renting apartments or finding other kinds of long-term accommodation.
Sihanouk was almost divine. Many believed that he was even responsible for the success of their crops. Sihanouk's Asian popularity could not change Cambodia's geography. In 1963, Sihanouk organized denunciations of America's growing involvement in Vietnam. He feared that the war would spread across his borders as South Vietnamese troops pursued the Viet Cong into Cambodia. He was willing to befriend any country or leader that he thought might assure Cambodia's survival. He formed a close relationship with China's Mao Zedong. He also courted leaders of non-aligned nations like Indonesia's President Sukarno. He strengthened his ties with France's President Charles de Gaulle. He also wrote, directed, and starred in his own feature films, all of them glorifying Cambodia. In 1966, Cambodia continued its carefree festivities despite growing dangers within the country and along its borders. Sihanouk had broken relations with America. His officers were becoming restless. Sihanouk was also beginning to face trouble in the countryside, where small groups of Cambodian communists, the Khmer Rouge, were recruiting some discontented peasants. Sihanouk continued to juggle. In 1967, he invited Jacqueline Kennedy to Cambodia, hoping to draw America's attention to his dilemma.
Oh, good. We'll be so so nice, too. It's not for themselves.
Sihanouk was concerned by the Vietnamese communist buildup in the sanctuaries, and he feared a large-scale U.S. attack across his borders. As a counterbalance to this visit, he denounced America's Vietnam policy.
It would be immoral to support, your aggression, the aggression of the United States against the people of Vietnam. We want to have the right to continue to have the right to be united, to be free. And how could we deny to Vietnam the right to self-determination?
Pursuing their enemy, American and South Vietnamese aircraft often attacked across the Cambodian border. Sihanouk criticized Secretary of State Dean Rusk, who was then trying to repair relations.
There is a contradiction between the declaration of friendship and respect from Mr. Dean Rusk on one hand, and on the other hand, your forces in South Vietnam continue to come into Cambodia and to kill
what is necessary
our peasants and innocent civilian servants.
In 1969, newly elected President Nixon launched secret B-52 bombing raids over Cambodia against North Vietnamese and Viet Cong sanctuaries, driving them further into the country. Nixon neither informed Sihanouk nor sought his approval for this escalation.
We had many indirect evidences of Sihanouk's acquiescence in the bombing. Repeatedly, when he was asked at press conferences, he would say that, of course, he did not approve attacks on Cambodian territory, but he did not know what was going on in territory occupied by what he called the Viet Minh, which was the earlier name for the North Vietnamese sponsored guerrilla activity. He invited Nixon to visit Cambodia while the bombing was going on. He reestablished diplomatic relations with us.
I didn't know anything about the bombing when I went to Cambodia.
And in fact, I didn't know anything about it until after it broke in newspapers. For some reason, I was never briefed on what was going on. I was aware of bombing, but not necessarily in Cambodia, because in my house on the banks of the Dasak River, at night, I not only could hear the bombing, but the whole house shook from the load of bombs when they were dropped, I assumed in Vietnam. But I suppose that eventually, I mean, most of them were being dropped in Cambodia.
In January 1970, Sihanouk departed for a vacation in France, a trip that would take him on to Moscow and Peking. He wanted help to curb the Vietnamese communist presence, which was arousing Cambodian hostility. In March, anti-communist officers unleashed mobs against the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong embassies in Phnom Penh. They demanded the expulsion of the Vietnamese communists.
I can say that some officers in our army and many deputies and many members of the government in Phnom Penh, they want to be your allies in order to have dollars, your dollars. They do not think, they don't think about the destiny and the fate of our homeland. They don't mind about it. They are more patriots for dollars than for Cambodia.
A week later, Sihanouk's anti